Let's talk about one of the most useful skills you can learn in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Chain blocking. So let's say you have a card whose effects you need to use, but you also know that your opponent has a card that can negate yours. If you have a second card whose conditions for activating were met at the exact same time as your first card, you can use the second card to chain block your opponent from being able to negate your first card. This is of course an oversimplified explanation of how this works, and it doesn't work like this every time, so I'll go into some more detail. For a more detailed example, let's say I control Nightmare Corruptor Ibli. I use Nightmare Corruptor Ibli and Microcoder in order to link summon Code Talker. Microcoder and Ibli both have effects that activate when used for a link summon, so I get to activate both of these effects and I get to determine which I activate first and which I activate second. So because I activated Microcoder as the second effect, if my opponent has Psyframe Gear Gamma, they can use Psyframe Gear Gamma, but they can only use it to negate Microcoder. They cannot stop the Ibli. But once again, I'm the one who determines which effect I activate first and which I activate second. So if I activated Microcoder first, and I used Ibli second, Gamma would only be able to negate the Ibli, it wouldn't be able to negate the Microcoder. Now it's important to mention that chain blocking only works because you have multiple cards that need to activate at the same time. Elsewise, your opponent always has the opportunity to choose to respond to your card immediately after you activate it. So you can't chain block your opponent with a card like Mystical Space Typhoon, because in this situation, Mystical Space Typhoon wouldn't be the second card activated, it would be the third. If you're still having any trouble with this, the simplest example would be if you control Sangan and Witch of the Black Forest. Your opponent destroys your entire field, so you get both effects, and you get to determine which effect you activate first and which effect you activate second. This allows you to protect your more important effect from cards which would negate the activating effect of another card. So in this example, you can protect Witch of the Black Forest from Ash Blossom and Joyous Spring by using Sangan, in order to ensure that you're able to search for Dark Armed Dragon. Now, something to always be aware of when you're trying to chain block is to know that you can't always determine which card activates first and which one activates second. So let's say you normal summon Tour Guide from the Underworld. You use this effect, and you special summon Sangan from your deck. You then link off Sangan and Tour Guide from the Underworld in order to make Nightmare Phoenix. At this time, Nightmare Phoenix and Sangan both hit their activation opportunity at the same time, so you get both effects. However, Sangan has to be the first effect activated and Nightmare Phoenix has to be the second. This is because Sangan's effect is mandatory and therefore has to activate. Nightmare Phoenix's effect is optional and therefore does not have to activate. The required order for cards that have to go before others are turn player mandatory effects, non-turn player mandatory effects, turn player optional effects, and non-turn player optional effects. This is important to know because your opponent might have cards that need to activate at the same time as well, in the case of a card like Torrential Tribute destroying all monsters in the field. Finally, let's look at some important cards that can and cannot be chain blocked. So the general rule is, if a card's effect reads, when a card or effect is activated, perform an action, then it can be chain blocked, because it has to activate its effect at that moment in response to another card's effect or activation. Ash Blossom is the prime example of a card that can be chain blocked, and in general, the cards that can be chain blocked are the ones that negate an opponent's card without targeting it. So you can't chain block a card like Infinite Impermanence, because Infinite Impermanence does not negate an activating effect, it negates a monster's effect by targeting it. Technically speaking, your opponent doesn't have to be activating the card whenever you use Infinite Impermanence in order to negate that monster's effects. An interesting example of a card that can be chain blocked, however, is Torrential Tribute. If your second effect summons a monster but your first effect doesn't, Torrential Tribute actually misses its opportunity to activate. I hope you found this guide helpful. This is the first video like this that I've made, but I plan on making plenty more in the future. Be sure to let me know in the comment section down below what game mechanic you would like me to cover next. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked what you saw, consider commenting, or subscribing. It really helps the channel grow, and I know I appreciate it.